The chaos we see erupting between Iran and Israel is not some new development born in the halls of politics or the chambers of military strategy. It was foretold. It was warned about by the one who never spoke from his own desire. The Prophet Muhammad, in his immense wisdom and divine guidance, spoke of days that would come when the world would be engulfed in fitna, times of severe trial, confusion, and unrest so heavy that they would shake even the strongest of hearts. And if we have ears to hear and eyes to see, we must recognize that we are standing in the shadow of those very warnings today. The Prophet said that there would come a time when killing would be rampant, and no one would know why they are being killed or why they are killing. And isn't that what we are witnessing? Leaders speak of justice, of national pride, of historical rights, but blood is being spilled, cities are being leveled, and souls are perishing without mercy. The lines between right and wrong, friend and enemy, truth and falsehood have become blurred. And yet, this confusion was prophesied. The Prophet called it fitna al-dahima, a dark trial that would envelop people like night, where a man would be a believer in the morning and a disbeliever by night. A time when truth would be covered with the garment of lies, and people would follow the worst among them. Iran and Israel are locked in a conflict that's more than strategy. It's a storm of identities, beliefs, and ancient resentments, stirred up by a world increasingly blind to the commands of God. What makes this even more tragic is that many hearts have grown numb. The headlines pass like entertainment. Bombs fall, children scream, and yet people scroll on without even a prayer. The Prophet warned us not just about the physical destruction, but about the desensitization of the heart. He said that the one who merely watches oppression and remains silent becomes part of the oppression. And if there was ever a time when silence was betrayal, it is now. But the Prophet didn't only speak about the signs, he taught us how to survive them. He said there would come a time when the best of people would be the ones who isolate themselves to protect their faith, holding on to their belief like one holds a burning ember. That's not just a poetic image. That's reality. Because right now, to stay faithful, to remain pure in heart, to reject hatred while standing for truth, it feels like fire in the hand. It burns. It costs. But it's the path of the sincere. He also told us about the danger of false leaders, those who would misguide the masses with eloquent words, all while their hearts are like the hearts of devils. He said they would come near the end times, dressed like sheep but driven by the wolf. We must be discerning. Not every flag waved is righteous. Not every voice speaking of justice is anchored in truth. That's why the Prophet said, in those days, the one sitting would be better than the one standing, and the one standing better than the one walking. Because the wrong move in these days of fitna could cost not only lives, but souls. This war, this moment in history, is not just about geopolitics. It's a divine test. A shaking of nations that reveals the state of hearts. Iran is not just a nation under pressure, it's a people with believers among them, many crying out to God in secret. Israel is not just a land in conflict, it's home to men and women who are confused, misled, but not beyond the reach of mercy. And we must remember, the Prophet came as a mercy to all the worlds, not just to his own tribe, not just to those who followed him, but to all. That means we must look at this war not with hatred, but with heartbreak. We must ask, what is God trying to show us, and how can I respond with faith instead of fear? This moment is a test, and the Prophet gave us the answers long before the questions appeared. Stay close to the Quran. Stay in prayer. Cling to sincerity. Avoid the flames of anger and vengeance. And most of all, keep your heart soft in a world that wants to harden it. Because in these times, the ones who will survive, truly survive, are not those with the biggest armies or the loudest voices. They will be the ones who held on to faith when it would have been easier to let go. As the world watches the confrontation between Iran and Israel unfold, most see a political standoff, a regional rivalry, or another chapter in Middle Eastern history. But for those who reflect with the light of faith, it becomes clear, this isn't just a battle over borders or resources. It's far deeper. This is a war that is spiritual at its core. A war between competing worldviews, between divine guidance and worldly arrogance, between those who bow before God and those who bow to their own power. The Prophet Muhammad warned us about a time when confusion would reign and truth would become strange. He said Islam began as something strange, and it would return to being strange. And what is stranger today than standing for the truth of God in a world drowning in pride, rebellion, and blind nationalism? This war is not just a geopolitical incident, it is the surface of a much deeper struggle, a war for the soul of mankind. Iran stands with its defiance, its resistance, and its pain. And though the political leaders may act with pride or politics, within that land are sincere hearts, believers who cry out to Allah daily. In Israel, we see a nation that claims divine history, yet whose leaders have strayed far from divine humility. They invoke the name of prophets, but too often dismiss the message of justice, mercy, and truth. And then we see the powerful nations, those who choose sides not by principle, but by profit. The world is watching a battlefield unfold, but the real war is happening where cameras cannot see, inside hearts, inside ideologies, inside the very nature of how man relates to God and to his fellow man. The Prophet said the Ummah would one day be like foam on the sea, many in number, but weak in substance. Why? Because our enemies would be strong? No. Because we would fall in love with the world and fear death. We would lose the spiritual backbone that made early Muslims fearless and principled. We would start fighting the wrong battles and forgetting the real one, the battle for our souls, the fight against ego, corruption, and disunity. What we see in this Iran-Israel crisis is just another example of what happens when humanity forgets God's boundaries and replaces worship with warfare. This is not a Muslim versus Jew issue. It's not East versus West. It is truth versus deception. And deception is strong today. The Prophet said that in the last days, liars would be believed and the trustworthy would be called liars. Isn't that what we're seeing in this war? Propaganda rules. Truth is buried. Those who kill with power are hailed as protectors, and those who stand in resistance are labeled as threats. The lines are blurred, deliberately, because the world is walking into an era the Prophet described as one filled with dulm, oppression, injustice, and darkness. But let's not make the mistake of seeing only external enemies. The Quran reminds us that the greatest enemy is within. It's the nafs, the ego, that seeks dominance, revenge, superiority. This is the same disease that fuels war, that turns neighbors into enemies and politicians into pharaohs. The Quran says, corruption has appeared on land and sea because of what people's hands have earned. This war isn't just punishment, it's a reflection. A mirror of our own failures. A result of turning away from revelation and turning toward power, pride, and politics. So what do we do in such a time? The Prophet didn't just inform us, he instructed us. He taught us that when division and darkness spread, the believer's job is to hold tight to the rope of Allah. To cling to prayer. To uphold justice. To speak truth even when it's unpopular, and to love even when hatred is easier. He said, help your brother, whether he is the oppressor or the oppressed. When asked how to help the oppressor, he said, by stopping him from his oppression. That's the wisdom we need today. Because the war between Iran and Israel will not be won through more bloodshed. It will only be truly resolved when hearts return to the one who made them. When justice matters more than flags. When mercy becomes stronger than missiles. When believers recognize that they are not here to be spectators, but witnesses to the truth, even if it's against themselves. And until that day comes, we must not be silent, we must not be deceived, and above all, we must not be spiritually asleep. The signs are unfolding. The pieces are moving faster now. What was once spoken of in distant warnings is now flashing across our screens and written in the skies. The Prophet Muhammad told us of these moments, not to paralyze us with fear, but to awaken us with faith. He said that near the end of time, events would occur in rapid succession, one after another, like beads falling from a broken string. And now, we see those beads scattering, war erupting, alliances shifting, truth mocked, and corruption celebrated. These are not coincidences. These are signs. The signs of the hour are no longer on the horizon, they are at the doorstep. In the Hadith, the Prophet described the signs that would precede the Day of Judgment. He said that people would compete in building tall structures, trust would be placed in the unworthy, and the barefoot and poor would become the leaders of men. But more urgently, he warned of a time when the Ummah would be in a state of weakness, not because of numbers, but because of wan, a disease of the heart. Love for this world, and fear of death. We are living in that time. We have grown attached to the temporary and forgotten the eternal. We cry for stability but run from submission. Look at the world stage now. Iran stands in defiance, Israel in retaliation, and powerful nations cheer from the sidelines or arm one side for their own gain. But what does this remind us of, if not the hadith of Malhama, the Great War, the fierce battles that would take place in the region of Sham and beyond, before the coming of the Dajjal? This is not fiction. This is not a conspiracy. It is prophecy. And we are living inside of it. The Prophet told us there would be a time when the truth would be difficult to find, when scholars would be silenced or corrupted, and when the ignorant would speak in their place. Look at today, those who speak with sincerity are mocked, while those who speak with arrogance are celebrated. The Prophet warned us that people would seek knowledge from the misguided, and they would be led astray. And that is what war does, it fogs the heart, clouds the judgment, and opens the doors to deception. This is also a time when the system of Dajjal is being laid brick by brick. The Prophet warned about the coming of a deceiver, one-eyed, not just physically, but spiritually blind. He said that before his arrival, there would be years of deceit, where the liar is believed and the honest man is distrusted. What do you see today in global narratives? Truth is no longer determined by facts or revelation, it's determined by who controls the media, who has the platform, who writes the headlines. That is the system of Dajjal, where the eye of truth is closed, and the eye of deception is wide open. The Prophet didn't tell us all this so we could just read it and move on. He told us so we would prepare. He told us so we would cleanse our hearts, recognize the traps of Shaitan, and cling tighter to Allah's rope when the world begins to shake. These wars, these global tensions, are signs. But they are also tests. Tests of faith, tests of clarity, tests of where we stand when the world begins to blur the lines. This war between Iran and Israel may escalate. It may spread. It may draw more nations into its flames. But the believer sees more than the fire. The believer sees the hand of God allowing the shaking, not to destroy the sincere, but to separate truth from falsehood. To remind mankind that power does not belong to presidents, armies, or alliances. It belongs only to Allah, the One, the Irresistible. So now is not the time to be distracted. Now is not the time to be spiritually asleep. The signs are not there to terrify us, they are there to confirm that the Prophet spoke the truth, that the Quran has never lied, and that the final hour is closer than we think. What we choose to do in this moment, how we respond, how we live, how we prepare, will echo for eternity. When the Prophet warned about the chaos and bloodshed of the last days, he didn't do so just to inform us, he did it to prepare us. He didn't want believers to become fearful when they saw the world shaking. He wanted them to remain firm. Because while the world scrambles for power and the leaders of nations race toward destruction, the believer is called to something higher. In these times, our role is not panic, it's preparation. Not fear, but faith. The Prophet gave us guidance for times exactly like these. When the fire of war spreads and the lines between oppressor and oppressed begin to blur, he reminded us to hold on to the truth no matter how heavy it becomes. He said a time would come when holding on to your faith would be like holding burning coal. That's not just poetic imagery, that's reality. Because in today's world, speaking the truth, defending justice, and standing firm in righteousness will cost you. It may cost you comfort, reputation, even safety. But it's in that moment, when your grip tightens on what burns, that your soul is purified, and your heart proves where it stands. This war, and all the ones that are to come, are more than battles of weapons, they are battles of character. They reveal who we truly are. Are we people who only turn to Allah in times of comfort? Or are we people who remain steadfast when comfort is stripped away? The Prophet told us to pray as if it were our last prayer. To remember death often. To live each day as if we may stand before our Lord at any moment. That's the mindset of the prepared believer, not one consumed by headlines, but one focused on the hereafter. And when he spoke of the Ummah being weak like foam, he wasn't just lamenting our numbers. He was showing us the cure. He said the disease is love of the world and fear of death. If that's the illness, then the medicine is clear: detach from the dunya and attach your heart to the akhirah. This is the time to renew our tawbah, strengthen our prayers, guard our tongues, and purify our intentions. It's the time to give charity, seek knowledge, and raise our children with truth, not just comfort. Because the reality is, these trials are not going to vanish. The Prophet said the trials would come like waves of darkness, one after another. But he also said, glad tidings to the strangers. Who are they? The ones who remain upright when the world bows to falsehood. The ones who keep their hearts soft while the world grows cold. The ones who prepare not just physically, but spiritually. There is wisdom in knowing that we were not created for this world. That every war, every crisis, every pain, none of it is permanent. The believer remembers that paradise is ahead, and no suffering in this life compares to the reward of the next. That's what gives us strength. That's what keeps us walking in the light even when the world around us descends into darkness. And make no mistake, this preparation is not passive. It's not hiding away. The Prophet was a man of peace, but also a man of action. He stood for the oppressed. He confronted injustice. He warned with clarity and loved with depth. That is our example. To be people who pray with sincerity, speak with wisdom, and act with courage. Not to spread fear, but to spread light. Not to be consumed by war, but to be witnesses of truth in a time of deception. So when the earth trembles and the nations rage, the believer does not run for cover. The believer runs to Allah. We raise our hands in du'a, we bow our heads in sujud, and we stand with truth even if we must stand alone. Because this life was never meant to be the reward. It was always the test. And now, more than ever, we must be ready to pass it.